those of you who don't know me yet, my name is Amy Ryan. I work with Ag Innovations, and we are supporting the Solano GSA Collaborative to develop their groundwater sustainability plan, and thrilled to have the support of the Community Advisory Committee members here to help us tap into what the community thinks and what you guys care about, and help us to refine the plan so that it can be really something that's effective as we go forward. And we also have, in addition to all you, there's two screens, I'm gonna hope to get them, but folks you'll hear from later will be Nick Watterson, who's on our project team, along with Vicky Kretzinger-Graybert, and we've got Sachi Itagaki here as well. I'm trying to think if there's any from our technical team who are hard at work gathering data and writing up this massive document. We've got Eric Ringelberg, who's from the GSA Collaborative. He's a part of the North Delta GSA. Thanks for being here with us, Eric. And I'm sure that there are people I can't see. I've also got Genevieve Taylor, Susanna Sussman, and Lupe Garcia from Ag Innovations, and Daniel Dolan from the Local Government Commission, sorry, it's like LGC, who's also going to be here and will be supporting in the background and doing some facilitation of the breakout rooms. So welcome. So our goals for today is to educate the CAC, as well as all of you observers who are joining us, on the integrated hydrologic model, its purpose, and what information is being derived from this model. And we'll quickly review the preliminary water budget. We went over it in depth last time, and we'll share what's been done since then. We'll have a discussion and get input from the CAC members, particularly on future land use projections and project and management actions. So there will be a presentation on what all of that means. So if you don't know yet, that's okay, stay tuned. And then we'd love your insights, particularly around future land use projections and management actions. And then we just want to get at the end a sense of which CAC members, as well as which observers, have had a chance to put comments on section 1 of the GSP, and as well as the community engagement survey, if you've had a chance to fill that out. So, and if not, we're going to give a brief sort of synopsis of what it looks like to give comments and look at and fill out the survey, just so you have the information you need to do that, because this is one way, these meetings are one way to get your input, which we are really excited about live. And also there's, for those of you that are willing to take the time, we would love for you to write it down as well. So before we move on, any questions about what we're covering today? And again, if you don't know what those words mean, like integrated hydrologic model, that's okay. That's the point of the presentation. But besides that, anything that you need to know before we move on? Okay, not seeing anything. Feel free to jump in with questions anytime. This is just a brief agenda, so we'll have a little check-in in a moment. Shouldn't say presentation check-in, I didn't mean that. And go into the integrated hydrologic model again, so get some feedback and talk about the survey's next steps. And for you observers that are here, we'll try to weave you in. The chat is a great way, if you have questions throughout, to put them in the chat, and we'll try to get to them there and ask our technical team and our GSA collaborative member to help us monitor the chat and answer questions there. And we'll have some time at the end for observer reflections and Q&A as well. Okay, just a couple words on how to make the most of our time together. When we start to talk about groundwater, there's lots that we could talk about, and just want to invite us all to do our best to focus the discussion on the groundwater sustainability plan and its development. And if you don't know where those parameters are, we'll help you know, but we might redirect the conversation if it starts to get beyond our scope. Stay present as much as you can. And so if that means closing some extra windows or silencing a phone or whatever it takes for you to be here, we're really grateful for this time and want to make the most of it, and invite you to help us to do that. Listen generously goes hand in hand with speak candidly and concisely. So really there might be some ideas that seem sort of maybe new or unique, and we'd love for you to be open-minded as well as really share what your perspective is. We really want to know, and because we're not too big of a group, but we want to make sure that there's time to hear from everybody, just to try to keep it as concise as you can while still getting the meaning across. And please ask lots of questions. That's how we're going to learn together. Okay, any additions that you would want to make to this list that would help in you to either be more present or to get the most out of our time together? Am I missing anything? So we're gonna dive into just a little check-in, and we're gonna put CAC members together and observers also, you guys will be together, just in some triads, small groups. Project team members, you guys are just gonna hang out in the main room. And just invite you to share your name if you haven't already, or if you haven't in the big group, but if that doesn't come out naturally, your name and where you live in the subbasin, and what land use or water use changes do you imagine will be happening in your area in the next 15 to 20 years. So if you can speculate if you're well connected either with real estate development or farming or other ways of using water and land in your area. We'd love just to give sort of get our wheels turning. And what's your best guess on what's coming down the pike in the next 15 to 20 years? So there'll be about 2 to 3 minutes a person and 9 minutes total in the breakout. We'll give you a reminder every 3 minutes. So if you want to go in a round and each person take about 2 to 3 minutes, great. If you want it to be more conversational, it's up to you, but we'll give you little reminders as we go. All right. So just want to take a couple minutes to hear from CAC members particularly. And we won't have a chance to hear from all of you, but maybe just a couple. And those of you who we don't hear from, you can throw your ideas in the chat. But would love to know if you want to introduce yourself, your name, where in the subbasin that you live, and any land use or water changes that you imagine coming in the next 15 to 20 years.
Okay, I'm Elizabeth Fry.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi there. I live in Pleasance Valley area, but I also work like all north Vacaville, rural residential agriculture and so on. As far as changes in our valley, I'm seeing people getting more and more involved in permaculture type of agriculture. They're coming in just to do more of it, and we're doing it ourselves, and we're like, that's kind of like my plan is to help promote that in our valley. So that is no-till, adding organic matter to, that would allow the soil to withhold more of the water coming in and regenerating. So I'm excited about kind of promoting that in our area. And other than that, it's not really going to change as far as development goes. North Vacaville, English Hills area, rural residential area, there's going to be some development out there. So there's probably in the next few years, there'll probably be a few more homes put in there, and that would be on the rural North Vacaville Water District. So, they do use wells.
Yeah.
So I think there's probably maybe, 120 new residences eventually that will go in there.
Great.
Hi.
Several different areas.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Hi.
Go ahead, Roberta.
Hi, so I'm Roberta Bressler-Sullivan, and I live in North Vacaville, and currently we have a basically defunct water system called the Rural Vacaville North Vacaville Rural Water System, which did not even provide water during the fire. And currently there's hopes of putting 44 homes on 40 acres right within a concentrated area in order to either use wells or this water district, which failed during the fire. So my real big concern is being that we're now having so frequent wildfires, and we also have a large pond behind us on 80 acres, which they also have developers want to put another 30 to 40 homes in a concentrated area, some with less than 1 acre parcels. The county plan is for 2.5, which seems really hard to meet, but so my interest really is in water because I'm on wells and I want to protect that. And we've got creeks between these 2 huge developments and a big pond. Yeah. So, and I have a master's in public health.
Got it. Okay. Well, we're so glad to have you here. And thanks for sharing that insight. Great. Well, I'm tracking the time. I'm going to move on. We're going to hear from Nick Watterson next, who's going to share on the integrated hydrologic model. But if you haven't shared already and you have other thoughts, there's going to be a whole breakout discussion later that you'll get more of a chance to share any of your thoughts on this future land use projections and water use. But in the meantime, again, if you have highlights, we'd love to see them in the chat, whether you're a CAC member or an observer or anybody else on the call. If you fall into another category, please share. Okay, so Nick, I think over to you. Are you ready to go?
Yeah, let me share my screen here and everybody can see that?
Yes, we can.
All right. Well, yeah, thanks, Amy. So we got a little slot here to give a brief overview on I guess on the agenda, it's integrated hydrologic model. I've got it groundwater modeling overview here. I think, you can think of them as one and the same for the most part, although, the key, with the integrated element and, titling an integrated hydrologic model is it does model both the surface water and groundwater interactions. And so that's why we emphasize the integrated aspects of it. So hold on just a second, let me move. So I guess just to be clear, so there's if folks are reading the GSP regulations and sometimes hearing discussion, sometimes you'll hear the word hydrogeologic conceptual model. And so just want to be clear that the hydrogeologic conceptual model is essentially our understanding of the hydrogeologic systems, the various processes, the setting, the aquifers, things of that sort. It's not actually a quantitated sort of modeling platform. And so just to differentiate that, I wanted to be clear that the hydrogeologic conceptual model, while it's very important in terms of its foundational components that go into other hydrologic modeling, that in a more quantitative sense, they are different. And the integrated hydrologic modeling that we'll be talking about today is a form of a numerical model. And it's a model that uses mathematical relationships to evaluate, and in this case, an integrated system of groundwater and surface water, and their relationships and the flows between those two parts of the water cycle. I'll touch on this a little bit more, but a key aspect of this is to generate water budgets. So the water balance, the different components of the water of the hydrologic cycle and the groundwater system, both historically what's occurred, what we think is sort of occurring under current conditions, and then also a future condition that we want to look at or potentially expect to see. And then again, groundwater, surface water interconnectivity, the numerical model and hydrologic modeling is key to understanding and providing insights into those relationships. And then again, just evaluating future conditions, and those can be all sorts of different scenarios that we might look at to understand whether that's land use changes, climate change, sea level rise, and then also various management actions or projects that folks may choose to evaluate just to understand the benefits or influences of certain actions. So within the context of Sigma and these groundwater sustainability plans, the GSP regulations, they require you to employ methods, and these are pretty much straight out of the GSP regulations here, that are sufficient to evaluate historic and projected water budgets and undesirable results. And so these undesirable results, if you kind of maybe throw your, take yourself back maybe a couple months to the last time, we spoke, there's these 6 sustainability indicators shown by these different icons: lowering of groundwater levels, chronic lowering of groundwater levels, reduction of storage, seawater intrusion, degraded water quality, subsidence, and surface water depletion. And those are essentially they're part of the GSP is defining minimum thresholds for each of those indicators, and using those as a metric for determining sustainability. And in doing that, we need to rely on the best available information and the best available science. And you must use a numerical model or equally effective tool. So a numerical model is it's a powerful tool for analyzing very complex and dynamic interrelated factors and processes, and certainly to the extent possible is the best available science, and and in many cases it's hard to with that complexity to find an equally effective tool. So therein is why we're doing this this modeling, and that we'll be talking about. So it's just, I'm not going to get into a lot of detail on what numerical just all the too far under the hood of numerical modeling, but I do want to provide a little bit of the foundational understanding of how it works. And the key thing to keep in mind is that all of these models are a simplified representation of reality, right? We can't specify everything in the groundwater system and surface water system, and there's a lot of heterogeneity that occurs both laterally and vertically, that we're just not able to capture. But in numerical modeling we divide the study area into a grid, a mesh, a grid, you can call it what you want. Essentially it has little polygons or elements, in this case we'll call them, and then there's nodes that are points that are also the vertices of those polygons. We assign properties at each of these nodes and or elements. Some things we assign at the node, things like a well that may be pumping, or a water level at a node. There may be things like element that we assign because it's an aerial thing. We'd like land use, we would assign at an element, and then the model takes those inputs and does computations. In a vertical space, we also have layering. So we have in this diagram here, it's showing 5, but that's how the vertically within the system we divide things up into these model layers, and that's the resolution essentially that the model is able to perform calculations and which we're able to assign properties in the vertical dimension, and then we input various model stresses, we would call them, things like pumping, recharge, and again, those are assigned at nodes and elements. And then the model computes groundwater flow between these nodes and elements, and using mathematical equations. And then we look at the results from that. And then in this whole process, sort of how we go about this, just to give a little bit of an idea, it's very data intensive to develop the model, and so we start out with looking at the data, identifying what the objectives of the model are. In this case, it's about looking forward in terms of sustainability and understanding that. In that process, I described this conceptual model. It's rather than just throwing data into a model, we need to make sense out of it a little bit, as we to make informed assumptions, because there are missing data that we don't have, and we have to fill gaps as we populate those. So understanding the bigger concepts of what's what's occurring and what exists in the basin or in the model area is important. And then with that information in hand, identify what the model platform is that we want to approach it with. There are various numerical modeling platforms. In this case, where it's a modeling platform called the Integrated Water Flow Model, IWFM for short. And it's if you're familiar with hydrologic modeling, another platform is ModFlow is another commonly used platform developed by the U.S. Geological Survey. But anyway, so there's considerations that go into selecting that platform. And then in this case, we've looked at other available models that are already existing, regional models or otherwise, that you can potentially build on. And then once we start working with the model, then we need to calibrate it using historical information, and then look at the output and various aspects of the output, and then ultimately, ask ourselves the question: do we have a calibrated model? Is it sufficient to answer the questions that we want to ask of it? If your answer is no, then you're back to the drawing board. You got a little more work to do. If things look good at that point, then we start into exploring predictive scenarios. That's putting, looking forward-looking scenarios where we may evaluate, hey, what do we think land use change is going to look like in the future? There are various other factors we could look at. Are there projects to implement? Is there climate change that's going to occur? And then ultimately, once we're done running our predictive scenarios, we're also looking at the uncertainty of that, and then documenting it. And then ultimately, really you want to once you have a good model, you've employed it. It's important to keep it updated, keep it refining, improve your understanding, and you can always improve the model and make it perform better in the future. I guess there's a couple of these different things that I blew through, but ultimately that's the workflow that you can imagine that goes through in this hydrologic models. In the case of in Solano Subbasin, we're working with a model we're calling the Solano Integrated Hydrologic Model, Solano IHM. And this is a model that started with, it's shown in the screen here to the left. These are the modeled elements and nodes that I was referencing, and then some of the stream nodes are shown, or stream segments are shown in blue, and then red are new segments that we added. But we started with a regional model that was developed by the Department of Water Resources called the Sacramento Valley Simulation Model. It covers the entire Sacramento Valley groundwater basin, and it provides some of the foundations of the model to work with, as well as some of the inputs. So rather than starting from scratch, it's a place that allows us to work with and refine an existing model. We've taken all the local information on land use, evapotranspiration, surface water deliveries, various other inputs, and refine those locally within the area of interest. We've added streams, adjusted various nodes, and then also done a bit of work on what we call the sediment texture model. That's how we characterize the subsurface, looking at well boring logs or other subsurface lithologic information that allows us and informs us of what the characteristics of those sediments are and the hydraulic properties, and then provided various other updates, including well locations and depths, and then we've also extended the model through 2018. It was previously through 2015, and then we extended it through 2018. And then as we calibrate that, we're calibrating our output, our simulated output, things like groundwater levels, stream flows, to observed output. So we're trying to make those two match, essentially achieve a good match through the calibration process. And then also during the calibration, looking at the water budgets, making sure things make sense, also comparing it to various known and observed water budget components that we have. And then again, some of the key model outputs: groundwater levels, water budget, groundwater surface water exchanges. Again, one of the key sustainability indicators that we'll be focused on, in addition to various things related to groundwater levels, are groundwater surface exchange. This whole idea of how water is moving between groundwater and surface water, and in what magnitude. So I mentioned that it's a model's a simplification of reality. So this shows here what the model layers. We've got 9 layers in this Solano IHM, and so those, again, when we look in the subsurface, that's the level of resolution that we can assign characteristics and properties. So those layers are superimposed here on an actual cross section of through the subbasin, and so we've got these 9 layers. They some of them line up with context, reasonably well. We've got 3 very shallow layers that enable us to at a higher resolution or understand or model the exchanges between the land surface and the groundwater system. And then when you get down into the deeper part of the system, the layering becomes a little bit thicker. But and so this is the point here, is to just show that we've got the ability for the model to perfectly replicate what's happening in the real world is limited by resolution in many ways, but when we look at things at a larger subbasin scale, it's able to do a pretty good job. When we look at the water, one of the key aspects of this model is simulating of water use and supply. In this model, the IWFM model that we've got, it's got something called an integrated demand calculator. Essentially, what it's doing is, on the fly, it's looking at land uses and climate, and from that deriving a demand. Say, for a given land use, it may have it'll have a certain demand, and that it's calculated on a monthly time step as it does that. And then we are also specifying surface water deliveries as a component. So various areas get surface water if you're part of a water district, or if you have access to riparian water. A certain area may be receiving surface water, other areas do not. But the way that the model treats this is it looks at the demand, it looks at the availability of surface water supplies to that area, and then any remaining demand is met by groundwater pumping. And so then in that case, the model calls for the model to pump water, and we tell in the model, we specify from what depth and at what locations that pumping would occur based on wells, and that's how it works. So right now we're in the process of calibrating this model. It's this map here shows the entire model area. Shown in dots are the various calibration wells that we're looking at. We've identified calibration wells that provide both a lateral distribution across the subbasin, but then also vertically. They're so wells screened at different depths in the subbasin, so that we can capture, both aerially and vertically different parts of the subbasin. Just some example of calibration that we're looking at in the upper left, we're looking at a well that the observed values are the blue lines, and the simulated values in the model are the lower set of lines. So in this particular well, we're seeing in the earlier period of the simulation. Right now, it's simulating a little bit lower than what the observed water levels are. Post roughly 2015, those start to agree a little bit more. In the upper right, as an example, the water levels the simulated and observed are tracking pretty darn closely in that particular well. As are they in the lower right. Those are the upper left and the two on the right are both, or all three of those are in the zone that we're calling the alluvial aquifer and upper Tehama zone. The well in the lower left is a very different. It's pumping from great depths. So this is or not pumping, but it's observing water levels at great depth. This particular well is a total depth of 1,850 feet, so quite a bit deeper in the system, and things are behaving a little bit differently there. There's it's just to show that that's an area where we're still looking at calibrating, looking at refining the calibration. But this is the process that we go through. Comparing simulated versus observed conditions, and then working with our sediment textural model that's in there to calibrate the aquifer properties that we've got in there. Again, in progress, this is how things look as we stand right now. These are what we call model residuals. This is a frequency distribution plot of model residuals here. In between the two red bars are residuals that are less than 10 feet. Essentially, the difference between the simulated and observed is within 10 feet. Ideally, you'd have as many wells as possible as close to a residual of 0 essentially as possible. That's not practical to expect that, but you'd certainly hope for a normal distribution where as you get your residuals get greater either on the negative or positive side, that those numbers fall off. Right here we've got it. As it stands right now, we've got a number of wells, it looks like, where we've got residuals of greater than 50 feet. And so that's why, there's some areas where we're still working on that. When we look at the overall performance, we also have various metrics and statistics that we're looking at to understand those residuals and look at things not only are we looking at the hydrographs that we presented earlier for the calibration wells, but also looking at the general statistics and how the model's performing. So these are just an idea of how we go about, looking at the calibration, deciding how we want to address improvements and refinements. And I think in the numerical model applications that we envision, again, it's the water budget, the sustainable yield are key aspects of the numerical modeling. It's the characterization of surface water and groundwater connectivity and the quantification of those exchanges. It's what's called stream depletion, or essentially that relationship is something that's very difficult to observe empirically in reality. And so numerical modeling tools are commonly one of the more powerful ways to get at that. So that's one of the key applications. And in this case, we're showing a characterization of losing and gaining in transitional reaches along Puda Creek, where based off of previous literature and work, but we'll continue to evaluate that relationship and looking at the locations of losing and gaining, and then also how that changes with time. And then again, looking at the future conditions, impacts of climate change, and I think as we'll touch on a little bit later, a key aspect of modeling is to try to get a sense for the benefits of projects and management actions that may be targeted towards a particular sustainability indicator. As an example, if stream depletion is of particular concern and we have a management action that we want to employ, we want to make sure that that management action is going to address the issue at hand. And then just as a quick refresher, the gaining, as I mentioned, it's a key sustainability indicator here. The stream depletion and particularly along Kuta Creek is of an area of interest. The idea that what we can have occurring is under certain conditions you have a gaining stream, that is groundwater is discharging into the stream to support the stream flow. A losing stream where you have the stream discharging and recharging into groundwater. Under a disconnected stream system, essentially what you do in the groundwater with the groundwater systems, raising groundwater levels, as long as they remain disconnected, really aren't going to affect the stream. But it's in that middle area where we do have losing or gaining, and we have pumping that is changing the water level in the groundwater and potentially influencing the stream flow that's occurring in nearby waterways. So that'll be one of the powerful ways that we'll be applying the modeling in this case. So just in brief summary, we're still working on the calibration. That's why I'm not providing final results. There's no water budget results that are ready to present from that. We do have, and Vicki, I think in a little bit, we'll probably touch on it, some preliminary water budget results from some previous activity, or just at least conceptually how things stand. We're looking at some various refinements in the modeling that we've got going on. Both a couple areas are initial conditions, and then something we call the boundary conditions. That's the conditions at the edge of the model where we are trying to where we have to specify things at the outer edge of the model, and then again, the deeper layers are an area where we are paying attention to right now, especially as we do this calibration and refine the aquifer parameters and things of that sort. We're doing it with a manual approach based on some level of professional judgment and consideration of the geology. And then at some point we also get past we get to a point where it's more effective and to use some automated techniques to fine tune that, and then also to evaluate how sensitive the model really is to perturbing different aspects of these aquifer properties, so that we can know a little bit more in a better way the uncertainty associated with the model results. And then the future scenarios will really be, once we have that calibrated model in place, be looking to implement these future scenarios that will really be the basis for demonstrating that the subbasin has a path forward to maintaining sustainability going forward. So that's, I think, all I have at the moment. I know there was a lot there, but just an overview of how we're going about it and what an integrated hydrologic model really is. But I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Nick.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. That was, really informative. I wonder if maybe just to stop screen share for now so we can see everybody, and then we might need you to share some screens based on questions again.
Right.
Thanks so much. So we have a few minutes for questions before we go into another presentation with Vicki. But before we do, I want to make sure that as much of that information can be integrated as possible. I know that was a lot. Whether it's clarifying questions or if you want to dive a little deeper. Yeah, Stephen?
Sure. So there was a schematic early on that showed a squarish grid, but the model is actually not squares. It sort of follows the contours, right? Okay.
Yeah, so that's good point. That was a convenient graphic that we have from there. There are two different model. I'd mentioned mod flow, and that's there are, there is a finite difference versus finite element. In this case, we're using. You notice that the geometry of the elements was not uniform, and so this is called a finite element model, where you can shape those elements however you want them to be, and oftentimes the elements are smaller as you get closer to stream, so it enables you to again simulate those interactions at a higher resolution.
Okay, got it. That's good.
Yeah.
And then on the grid map layer, I saw it was kind of hard to read, like there was, because you clipped it from a region-wide one, the whole Sacramento Valley, you clipped out more than just our groundwater basin.
Right.
And
yeah.
for those edge areas, are those somehow connected or resolved with the adjacent models and basins?
Yeah. So that's a challenge. You're right. The one of the reasons we clipped it with a quote unquote buffer area outside is so that when we specify conditions, because we have to specify these boundary conditions at the outer extent of the model. The idea is that hopefully that buffer reduces any impacts of incorrectly specifying it essentially at that edge. It's really hard on the interaction, and so those at the model boundary, we are taking those from the regional model, and then also other conditions in other areas. It's really hard with everybody. All these adjacent subbasins are sort of at the same point in the process to really tightly integrate the information from their work. And so, but we are working to try to coordinate, and it's interbasin coordination is certainly a part of the whole groundwater sustainability planning, to work with those adjacent subbasins to make sure that those conditions in those areas make sense. I think one of a real challenge will also be going forward and what do you assume occurs in those areas.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks for that question, Stephen. We could probably take one more question, and really want to say that there's no question that's, I mean, there's some that are out of scope, but too elementary. We really want to make sure that you're understanding things. And so if anything doesn't make sense, or you just want to hear something in a different way, please feel free to ask it. I'm sure you're not the only one with that question. Happy to open it up also to see both, of course, CAC members, but if there's an observer that has a question, we're happy to take that now too.
Hey, Nick, this is Tom from the CAC.
Oh, great. Hi, Tom.
Hi. Is the main reason for doing the groundwater modeling to set the water budget?
Well, I wouldn't say set the water budget, but it is definitely a big part of it, to understand the water budget and the sustainable the sustainable yield. There are a number, like I said, it's I think there are various components that we're looking at there, and so it really, a lot of it of course is related to the water budget, but there are various sustainability indicators that we want to make sure that we're looking at, whether that's groundwater levels or whether it's or whether those stream depletions. But yeah, it's all, a lot of it is really related to the water budget.
And then,
I think, yeah, go ahead.
Just a quick follow-up question, if you don't mind. At some point, if groundwater modeling is being used as part of, let's say, management actions to allow or limit groundwater pumping in certain areas, I can anticipate some people may get upset about that and want to challenge the models. What do you see as far as models being constantly revised, or if they are challenged, what kind of defense do you put up in that type of situation?
Well, I mean, I guess it's, yeah, I'm not gonna comment on whether there's going to be, any management actions that directly, prohibit folks from pumping, as an example. But yeah, I think you're right. There could always be, somebody that disagrees with the results from it. I think, I guess all I can say is that, you go at it with it, like, as I said, that with the, with our best possible understanding and ability to, to make the model as good as it can be, given limitations. But it is not a, it's also not a tool that is, that really we can look at things at a very field scale. I mean, there are limitations to the level that you want to interpret the results, and there's always uncertainty with those as well. So I don't know if that answers it, but I think it's we also, if it became a particular question, the model is one aspect of it, but there's also other ways to try to understand and looking at data, specific to a location, as an example. But so we would, I think you'd imagine looking at it from a variety of different ways and with different tools.
So are you suggesting that the model is static or dynamic over time?
It's dynamic. It's a simulating an output every month. The monthly inputs change, and so that's historically it's simulating the actual historic conditions, and then when we go forward, it's going to simulate some sort of projected future condition that we implement.
I guess I asked my question poorly, and that is, when I ask if it's dynamic, are the assumptions that go into the model able to be changed or dynamic over time, or once you come up with those assumptions now, are you stuck with them?
And Nick, I just want to, we're a bit behind time, so if
okay.
However brief you can make your answer, and then we'll put it in the chat for folks to look at, and then we can just move on with the presentations, and we'll also have time to ask more questions when we get in the breakout. So I want to let you answer that, and then we'll move on. Yeah. Thanks.
I think in the greater vision, I think you'd hope that it would be a dynamic product, that it would, if something comes to light that makes you question your assumptions, that you would update how that's implemented in the model. Yeah.
Great. Okay, such good questions, and I hate to cut questions off because we keep saying ask a lot, and now we have to keep going to give you even more information to ask further questions about. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Vicki, who's going to talk about future land use projections and projects and management actions. Thanks, Vicki. And I'll just say to Nick to help us just watch the chat and invite folks, whether it's questions from previously or if you have questions that come up as Vicki's sharing, you can pop those in the chat, and we'll have folks on the technical team tracking those and try to answer them as they come up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. All right, over to you, Vicki.
Okay, great. Thank you. Everybody can see the screen. Okay. All good. All right, great.
Yep, you can see it.
All right, so we're going to head into another part of the presentation, some of which will integrate back with what Nick just talked about. So this next part of the presentation, it relates to the overall topic of the groundwater sustainability plan. And here on this particular slide, we're highlighting with the stars, parts of the two components that we're going to touch on next. And we're especially going to focus the discussion this afternoon on looking at potential future land and water uses as associated with the land use and how these relate to the future 50-year water budget, which is a required component of the groundwater sustainability plan regulations. And then we're also going to discuss potential projects and management actions, which Nick briefly mentioned. These are those things that could be implemented in the future as needed to maintain groundwater basin sustainability. And they're the kinds of things that would be implemented in order to mitigate or buffer potential effects of future conditions like future land use and changes in future water use, or as a result of climate change. So this is going to present some background information, but mainly we're going to be seeking the committee's input on these topics. So there's a few slides that I'm going to touch on that are a little bit going back to what we talked about last time with the committee. And this had to do with the preliminary water budget work. This was information developed for 4 GSA areas within the subbasin, including the city of Vacaville, the Solano Irrigation District GSA, the Solano Subbasin GSA, and also the combination of the Delta region GSAs, including the Northern Delta GSAs and the Sacramento County GSA. So this was the preliminary work that was done by one of our technical team members, David's Engineering. And in their work, they basically covered, the top part of what's going on at the land surface to the root zone, but accounting for all the surface water that we know of to be delivered, to meet the demands of the land uses, water needs at the land surface, including groundwater pumping. So it doesn't accommodate all of what Nick just talked about with the integrated hydrologic model. As the committee may remember from last time, we had this upper part of the modeling that David's Engineering has done in the red box, and then the part below that red box is the other piece that comes into play with the entirety and the integrated hydrologic model. So the reason that I bring these two pieces up is it relates to the work that's already been done, data gathered from all of the GSAs related to land uses during a historical period of time, including 1991 to 2017. So we have land use and water use data, received from the GSAs, during that period. So these are just pieces of information kind of paving the way to what we're going to get to talking about with the projected land use. So what we know from the historical information and understanding land use over time, it's important because that certainly relates to the source of the water used. That can be surface water, which is largely the case in the Solano Subbasin. There's an enormous amount of conjunctive use of both water and surface water that's occurred over the years in the Solano Subbasin, which has been a very good thing to allow for conditions to be maintained in a largely sustainable condition in the Solano Subbasin. But as I mentioned last time, there's certainly areas, especially in the northwesterly part of the basin, both near to the boundary and outside of the boundary, where we've seen some declining groundwater level trends, including, as Roberta mentioned, up in the North Vacaville area, where there have been some declining groundwater level trends. So those aren't consistently shown, but it's something that we're tracking. So back to the land use. Here we're looking at a comparison between 1993 to 94, and then on the left-hand side of the screen, and then comparing that to 2014. And this is showing an increase in acreage for perennial crops, the deciduous fruits and nuts like walnuts and almonds, increasing by just under 19,000 acres during this 20-year period of time. So as we look at this more in a bar graph format for major land use categories, this slide is showing how land uses have changed during this 1991 to 2017 period, where we've analyzed a historical water budget as part of the David's Engineering work. And we can see that each of these land use categories shown in the different colors associated with each year, they exhibit slight changes over the period for this entire analysis. So the urban land use acreage we see has increased somewhat. The native vegetation acreage we see has very slightly also increased. And then agricultural land use acreage over this period has decreased. So after we have put together all this information, one of the things that's required for the groundwater sustainability plan is looking not only what past conditions can inform us about historically, so that 1991 to 2017 period, we also need to look at current conditions, and we're also required to look at the 50-year future conditions. So you may wonder, how the heck are we going to know what's going on in 50 years? That's a big ask, but we need to do our best. And we thought, okay, the technical team doesn't really want to make assumptions about this. So we started first with asking the Solano GSA Collaborative. So all the GSAs that we're meeting with monthly, we wanted to get their end use input on the land use and associated water use that might be occurring in the near term. So approximately a 5-year lookout, in a little bit longer term, approximately a 10-year lookout. And then the best estimate available would be a 50-year lookout. What's it going to look like for land use and water use? And to do this, we summarized for them all the work that had come about through the Davis Engineering surface water system water budget analysis, and then got their feedback. The GSAs went off individually and also collaboratively and came back with some of their estimates. We still have some reconciliation to do with some of the land use where it's the idea of what may go from agricultural land use to urban conversion in the future. The estimate is about 3,500 acres and where that would occur. So all of this is important as we look ahead to how it will be incorporated into the model that Nick just described. So what we know from the initial input from the collaborative for the urban areas, we understand the following, that right now the urban areas, they represent about 32,500 acres. This is about 9% of the subbasin. The majority of this urbanization has already occurred during this period that we just analyzed. Their estimates are an increase in urbanization of about 2% or up to a little more than 6,000 acres that could occur in the next 50 years. And the urbanization primarily projected to occur around Vacaville and the Dixon sphere of influence. In agricultural areas, we also wanted to look at that. Right now, we're looking at more than 200,000 acres of agricultural land use. This is about 58% of the subbasin land use. And we're looking at the likelihood, anticipation of a 3% or so reduction in the next 50 years. And as most of you have experienced or are aware, they expect some additional increases in acreages of almonds and walnuts, vineyards, and miscellaneous orchard crops, and also reductions in acreages for alfalfa, corn, tomatoes, wheat, and grains. There's also an estimate of a little bit of increase in native riparian and water area usage, about 2% in the next 50 years. So today, I'm just going to touch briefly on this because we're going to circle back to it as part of the breakout group and discussions. So we are really seeking your input. We got the input from the GSA Collaborative, their best guesses, but all of these things are really important to, receive the input from the stakeholders, those who know what they've seen historically, what they're familiar with in their area, your area, and what you think might occur in the future. So we started this whole meeting with a best guess in your very local neighborhood. Now we're asking you to look out a little bit further in time and just imagine what else you think might occur. And all of this is really best guesstimate for planning purposes. We're trying to look at what stresses could be imposed upon the basin in the future and how that can be planned for to ensure sustainability in the long term. So we're going to go next to talking about projects and management actions. And these are specifically called out in the groundwater sustainability plan regulations and actually described with respect to requirements. And they describe things that we're going to touch on in the next few slides. The Community Advisory Committee also had some materials that we provided to the committee to take a look at prior to today's meeting to give you an idea of the nature of the regulations. And we're just going to touch on some of those things as a quick framing for the discussion. So for projects and management actions, some key things that we need to describe as required by the regulations. And we're also referring to these as PMAs. So if you hear that acronym, which I'm probably going to say a lot in the next few minutes, it's describing the projects and management actions. And there are those things that can be used to effectively achieve the sustainability goal for the subbasin, or the things that could be implemented in response to changing conditions in the groundwater basin. We're looking to describe what could occur in order to achieve a desired measurable objective. Now, I know that's a term we haven't really talked much about. Nick mentioned the sustainability indicators briefly in his presentation. That measurable objective is a sustainable management criteria. It's a desired goal, where we want water levels to be in the future. And that is an example, that could represent, for instance, stable groundwater levels that occur at a certain depth below the ground surface after a drought period. We also need to describe with these PMAs the manner in which they would be implemented and how notice and actions would occur once it's determined that these projects or management actions are needed in order to achieve or maintain sustainability. So a little bit more on the requirements. We need to, with these PMAs, we need to be able to quantify how water demands would actually be effectively reduced if that's what we need to do in order to achieve sustainability. We also need to describe permitting and regulatory processes. We need to say, when they're implemented, over what time they'd be implemented, how they'd be initiated, and how they'd be completed. We need to describe how the benefits, that we expect to occur, how they'd be realized. And we need to describe what legal authority may apply, for implementing these, what is actually possible for the GSA to do, or what other authorities might be needed. We need to provide an estimated cost, and we need to describe ultimately how these would achieve the long-term sustainability. So one of the reasons for describing all this in short is to say that we're looking for things that rise to the top of our radar, things that are more significant. They're not in the category of being, volunteered conservations in somebody's backyard. We need something that's significant enough to cause us to go through and address all of these requirements and consider how they might be evaluated in the context of a scenario, for instance, as part of the modeling when we look out in that 50-year horizon.
Vicki, I just want to let you know too that we're about at time for this. So I know you have a few slides left, but just to keep that in mind.
All right, thanks.
Yep.
So we're going to go quickly through a couple of examples of project categories. One category is how do we expand the supply of water? And I won't read through all of these, but it's in order to augment groundwater replenishment or provide more supplies, for the land uses in the subbasin. So recharge being a key one of interest. We also have ways that we would work to control demand. So we want to figure out how do we reduce pumping, and those can occur through a variety of ways, including more efficient irrigation or land fallowing, pumping restrictions, or conservation. But again, it needs to be fairly significant if we're in the mode of trying to ensure sustainability. And then circling back on what we talked to the committee about last time, we showed the potential groundwater recharge areas, those areas that have more potential for recharge to occur, the areas that are colored green versus those that are red. And one of the things that is of high interest in California for potential replenishment is through stormwater capture and using that to apply it to areas that have high potential for recharge. And then another thing, just as a reminder, what we talked about last time is it really matters a lot as to what you're trying to accomplish with that recharge. We may be able to move that recharge, water applied at the land surface into the shallow part of the system. But if we're pumping from deeper parts of the system, that recharge water may take a very long time, potentially hundreds of years, to get to deeper parts of the system, and may even be from outside the subbasin. So we really need to know, through the modeling, if we're going to do large recharge projects, what exactly effect are we going to have by conducting what kinds of recharge where? And so coming to your input, the committee's input, we want to know, what you might be thinking about, how can either projects like recharge projects or management actions like conservation or, other things, what benefit can they derive, in a larger way, and what might be some of the biggest obstacles that could occur to actually implementing some of those kinds of things. So that wraps up this, and I think we'll be going into breakout groups soon to get some brainstorming going.
That's it. Yeah. Thanks so much, Vicki. Really appreciate that. Okay. And I'm also want to say thanks to Sachi and Nick for answering questions in the chat. There's great questions happening, and really appreciate the information you just shared, Vicki. So we have just a couple minutes if anybody has questions that you want to ask in the big group, and there will be time to ask both clarifying questions and deeper questions once we get into the breakout groups. But I do want to just see if there's any burning questions before we go into the small groups.
Hi, it's Roberta.
Hi.
Something I was just going to type in the comments, but I just recently found out, like for us in North Vacaville, we have a creek called English Creek. Our creeks are mostly seasonal creeks, but I found out that's owned by the people who own that property. It's not a public owned creek, which was a surprise to me because I thought all waterways were public. And I think that for here in this part of the county, that could be an issue, because I was talking to somebody about trying to get English Creek cleaned up because there's a lot of debris in it, metal stuff that was thrown in there, things of that nature, which would be nice to have that, clean so the water is able to flow and all of that. But is that something you see commonly, that a creek would be owned by the landowners and not a public access?
So I'm not very familiar with that creek. I don't know, Nick, if you are.
No, I'm not. I'm certainly not aware of the details surrounding that. I guess, and I'm also not up on property rights and all the details of that. But but I am aware of other, various other properties that have waterways flowing through them that are wholly, my suspicion is there may be something related to the navigability of the waterway in terms of how that, that classifies it, in terms of providing, allowing folks access to, often, I know, sometimes there's high water to high water, that sometimes has a public right of way, but I'd be totally out of my realm on that.
I actually, before we go into the breakout rooms, my understanding is we have Dale. I think he's still here with us. Is he?
Yes, I'm right here.
Hi, Dale. Do you have an answer to Roberta's question?
It is an interesting question. We've worked with it with SQA flood policy that we put into place. Most of the homeowners own halfway down the creek. And if the county owns the other side, then we have a problem with trying to figure out how to clear the creeks, because landowners own half and the county owns the other half. Or it could be the other neighbor owns down to half and the other neighbor owns down to the half. So it's very interesting on creeks how everything is set out with the parameters as far as who owns where and what owns where. Like Lattice Creek, half of the people, the half of the people that own houses along Lattice Creek own all the way to the center of Lattice Creek, while the county owns the other half. So it becomes a very confusing issue of how do we clean creeks when we have to get permission from every single person, because we just can't clean a creek and go every other neighbor that agrees upon it. And so in different creeks, you might have two neighbors that go down and meet halfway in the creek that you have to then all of a sudden get permission all the way down the creek. And so it becomes a huge project trying to get everybody to agree to who's going to pay for it, how they're going to work with it, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what we came up with the flood policy and the problems that we ran into. So that's it for me. Over.
Thanks, Dale. And I saw, was your hand up also just to help answer that one, or did you have a question of your own?
No, I was just going to help that on answer that one because of the flood policy I am on.
Yeah, and I just want to invite you to introduce yourself. I could do so, but please, just so other folks know your role.
Okay, I'm Dale Crossley, and I am the chair right now for 2021 on Solano County Water Agency. I am also the director on 2068 Irrigation District. So that's my background, and have a lot of interest in what's going on all aspects of the county and also the GSP. Thank you.
Thanks, Dale. Really appreciate you being here and sharing that. Okay, I think I'm going to invite everyone else to save your questions for the breakout rooms. I'm just going to share my screen really briefly. So as I think Lupe will put any last minute touches on the breakout rooms. We have people coming and going and going and coming, and so it makes the breakout room job really fun. So really quickly, just in the breakout rooms, every breakout room will have CAC members, some observers, some project team, technical team members, and a facilitator note taker to help capture it. So you don't have to answer all of the questions. We don't even expect a full round, but there will be, and we'll share, the facilitators will share a notes document for each of the breakout rooms, so you can see if that's helpful for you. But do you have any questions based on what was shared? Are there other sources of information or data that we should consider? Other assumptions that we should consider regarding land use, population growth, or other tips that could impact groundwater use? And just general feedback that you might have on the projects and management actions based on what's been shared so far. And there are, I also grabbed Vicky's questions that she outlined in her presentation, and those are also in the notes document that each breakout room will have. So there's some more specific questions in there that your facilitator will walk you through. Again, we don't expect each one of you to answer all of them, but just whichever ones that you feel that you can offer some insight on, we'd really appreciate it. Okay, so
Roberta, would you still be willing? And I can fill in any gaps.
And we're just looking for brief highlights.
So the first thing we talked about was, I think, was a question about ag land conversion to urban land and the protection of existing wells and how that affects water. We talked about the division of drinking water regulates and counties regulate new wells and land decisions. And then we were talking just now about water purification. So other projects to increase our groundwater through new projects and new ideas. And it was mentioned that Southern Cal has a project purifying wastewater and then using that as groundwater. And we talked about how septic systems, there's something else in that regard, but that's all I remember.
That's perfect. Anything else you'd add, Susanna? Does that capture it?
Yeah, that captures it. I think, just trying to broaden the perspective on how you might increase supply, given that, water is finite and is in a cycle, and thinking about recharge, reuse, capture, that kind of thing.
Great, thanks. Genevieve, your group, did you guys?
We didn't ask anyone either. Hey, Sarah, are you up for sharing? Do you feel okay with that? Or would you prefer me to do it?
I'm going to defer to you, Jenny.
Yeah, if I give you the option. Sorry about that. All right. So maybe Sarah and Tom, you let me know if I've missed anything. So we talked about questions, and there's some great questions about, is this approach standard to other subbasins? We're doing a very detailed approach here that's pretty extensive and will be very helpful as we're thinking about future land use projections. Some great questions about, what's the most challenging thing to answer around this, and talking about replenishing water and things like that. So I won't go into detail on that, but we'll make sure that those answers are in the notes. In terms of land use, a couple of important pieces was economic pulses seem to happen in the Central Valley, and so it maybe will be quiet for a while and then there'll be a big burst. And also the transition from row crops to perennial crops is one that both Sarah and Tom have seen, both locally as well as more broadly in the Central Valley. And I think, there's certainly, it is kind of an interesting question of whether ag land stays ag land or if it converts to development. And as we talked about PMAs, thumbs up on kind of the broader list, but question about could native plant restoration, like removing Arundodonax, giant cane, be a part of it, and a recommendation that carrots are better than sticks in terms of incentivizing local participation.
Great.
Yeah, great conversation. And Tom and Sarah, did I miss anything big?
You got it
No,
all.
that was good.
All right, thumbs up.
She's a pro, literally. Okay, speaking of pro, Danielle, your team group.
Thanks, Amy, and Jeremy very kindly agreed to give our report back.
Great.
Hello, yeah, we had a very good conversation as well. We talked a lot about recharge and the developers coming in and possibly buying up some land and planting trees and everything goes to drip, and which ultimately would impact the recharge of the water, which definitely is a problem. But we also have, conservation efforts trying to, mitigate those as well. So, it's kind of a catch-22 of, what do? We all go to drip, then, obviously we suffer from the recharge going on, and tailwater's not being captured and putting in ponds and ultimately helping the recharge in those efforts as well. So we talked a lot about that. I don't know what else.
Thanks,
I can't
Jeremy.
remember all the
Anything?
questions.
Yeah, there were a lot of them. Anything you would add, Danielle? Highlights?
Jeremy did a really great job summarizing. I'm just scanning our notes real quick to see if there are any other key points. We did get an update from the North Delta GSA, as Eric was in our group, so that was helpful.
Lucky.
And talked a lot about recharge and potentially wind farms as a PMA to offset the energy costs.
Great. Okay, well, thanks everyone. We are nearing the end of our time, and I just want to make sure to get some of the CAC members may need to leave, and I think we have only a couple, trying to look, actually only a couple observers left, so we might not be as short on time as I thought. But just moving into a quick overview of GSP section commenting, so that the CAC members that you really know how to do that, as well as just so you have a visual and can understand how to fill in the community engagement survey if you haven't done that already. And just to help us know where we're at, I'm going to launch a quick poll. It's just 2 short questions. This is really for the CAC members, but I'm happy if others here as observers, project team members, you don't count, have either commented on the sections, and it's not an accountability check. It's okay if you haven't. We're just wanting to get a sense of where folks are at. Great. Oh, great. Thanks for your questions, Stephen. I see those in the chat. I'll defer to Nick and team to look at those. Okay, great. Looks like everyone. So I'll just share the results. So it looks like one person's done the section 1 commenting and a couple people have done the community engagement survey. So that's good to know. That means that Lupe's presentation is not for nothing.
Okay, so this is the website. This is what the homepage is going to look like when you're on there. And just about every page on this website will have this bar on the side. And this bar will redirect you to the page where you can do the GSP commenting. So if you just click on this button here, it'll redirect you to the GSP draft sections. So there's actually two ways to get to this page. So you could either click that button as I did before, or on the home page, you can click up here and go to GSP draft section. And both of those would be the avenues to getting to the draft section page. Here you'll be able to find the PDF file for the section and also the survey itself. We'll say right here, to comment on section 1, click here. Once you click on this link right here, it'll redirect you to the survey. I believe this one's for the commenting, and this is what that's going to look like. On the survey itself, it'll also have the PDF link right here. Click here, and then it'll take you through a series of questions to do the commenting. It is, as you can see, it's about 8 questions. Anything, if you would like to do multiple commenting, this is one thing to note, is that you can click here to do additional commenting. Say you have more than one thing that you really want to comment on. If you click there, it'll take you to the survey again, and you'll be able to do additional commenting. But it's important to remember to complete this survey before you check out of the page. So just click done before it's as you're redirected to the following survey for any additional commenting. And then also, these bars are just found just about any page. If you scroll down, you'll be able to see here is the community engagement survey. And it also has a button that says take the survey. You can find it on any one of our pages. And then that will redirect you to the community engagement survey. It'll go through a series of questions. They're pretty short. You can take it either in English or in Spanish, depending on your preference. And yeah, and that's about the fast, the fast tutorial on how to do that. So as the sections are released, this will be the main page where you'll be able to see what sections are released and available for commenting. The next section, section 2, will be available later this month. If you have not signed up for our GSA newsletter, let me or Amy know if you'd like to get those type of notifications, letting you know when the next section will be released. So, yeah, anything else you'd like to add, Amy?
You nailed it. Thanks, Lupe. That's
awesome.
Perfect. Okay, any questions on that before we just open it up to broader questions? Makes sense. Okay. Great. Well, before we close, I actually don't see, other than Barrett, any observers left. So we do have extra time. I saw that Stephen, it looks like Nick's answering your questions, but I know that Tom had one as well. And open it up to anybody else who has some questions. Tom, I don't know if you want to ask your question out loud, or if Nick, you're working on the answer to that in the background.
Okay, I'll just read it. So, you know, Vicky was talking a little bit about additional water maybe perhaps being available from excess storm flows. And I was just curious because Puda Creek goes into the Yolo bypass, and Elias Creek goes to the Delta. Would capture of excess storm flows be objected to by agencies or groups that are looking to maintain or increase water flows for environmental and other purposes in the Delta?
So Tom's good question. So I'm not super familiar with it, but Yolo County Flood Control Water Conservation District, maybe 2, maybe 3 years ago, started getting permits through the state board to allow for, a temporary diversion, where there is surplus water available. So I'm pretty sure it would require a permitting process, but the state board is trying to make that, more immediately available in order to have the advantage of actually using that stormwater for beneficial purposes. If it got to be too large of a planned diversion, then that would probably create other kinds of questions. So it's a good question.
Thank you.
We have a survey that we would love for you guys to fill out. I'm going to put the link to that in the chat. It's a feedback survey about this meeting, both the content and the process, just so that we can continue to improve. Is it the presentation? Okay, great. So just to take a moment to offer your feedback on that link. If you haven't already, which it looks like most of you haven't, just to comment on section 1 of the GSP, it'd be really great to have your thoughts on that. To take the community engagement survey that Lupe went over. And Lupe also sent out a scheduling poll to help us schedule the June CAC meeting. So we would love for you to fill that one out. And we'll send a follow-up email with all this, because some folks aren't here, but we'd just love to invite you all to help us with those pieces. And as always, you can email me, or now Lupe too is supporting with questions. Well, a huge thank you to all of you for giving your time to being here and making it to the very end. You should get a prize or something. And big thanks to Vicky and Nick for putting in the time and making these presentations and sharing your wisdom, and Sachi and Danielle, and as well as Lupe and Suzanne and Genevieve for making this meeting possible. Really grateful to have you all here.